Hello. You are listening to the Carroll Connection with your host, Jared Carroll.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Carroll Connection. I'm your host, Jared Carroll, here to bring you guys another great episode. I did want to take a chance to shout out my last episode 201, Birthday Reflection, year 29. It was, as you guys know, my birthday reflection, and I kind of went into detail about my book, The 5 Pillars of Creating a Meaningful Life, reaching 200 episodes, the kind of future of the podcast, kind of where I'm at. Like, I'm still enjoying doing the podcast. I'm going to keep trying to do this for as long as I can until something changes in my life that I can't do it or have to change something about the podcast. And it's just one of those solo episodes where I kind of reflect a little bit. So if you guys enjoy those podcasts, you can go check that out, the carolconnection.simplecast.com. Also available Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the major listening platforms. If you like to watch your podcast, go on YouTube, search the Carroll Connection or at Jared M. Carroll, and it should pop up. And if you want to be a guest or return as a guest, hit me up on Instagram at Jared M. Carroll, at the Carroll Connection, and we'll set that up. As well as you guys have known, since I dropped it in October, The 5 Pillars to Create a Meaningful Life is available on Amazon. Please purchase the book. Please support me. If you buy the book and read the book, please review it on Amazon as well, because that goes a long way with supporting the book as well. So that brings me to today's episode 202 with Kwon.
Hey.
Welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Thank you for having me.
Got to shout out my buddy Zane. He kind of told me about you and was able to kind of help me link up with you and set up this podcast. So I shout out to him.
Shout out Zane.
And just let the people know who you are and what you're doing currently.
I'm Kwon Rabbit, and I'm an independent artist. I was birthed in Fall River, Massachusetts. A young kid from the Riv, Forsaken Prophet, the Batman of rap, the 5'4", but yet 7'8", shortest, tallest rapper you'll ever meet.
I love that. As a fellow short king, I definitely rally behind anyone that could put us out on the map and keep promoting this shit. But like I told you off podcast, I like to get into family dynamic first. And for any first time listeners, I always kind of like to give them my little like rundown, kind of like cliche, and of like why I do it. Mm-hmm. And why I do family dynamic is because everyone has a different dynamic. Everyone comes from a different thing. And I think it's important when we're touching upon your life story to kind of at least touch upon it, just to get into like that aspect of it, and also gives me insight into kind of like how you were raised and where you come from, and helps with building the whole thing. And I always compare it to like building houses. Like the foundation of a house is our family essentially. And for better or for worse, like it's important always to get into that stuff. And I think it's a good topic and it's a good place to start. So with that being said, with whatever you're comfortable with sharing, obviously, sure, I'll let you kind of dive into your family dynamic.
Got you. Is there anything you want to know, like right off the bat?
It's whatever you're comfortable. So it's kind of how your relationship is with your parents, whether together, whether not together. Do you have siblings? Right. Like you mentioned Fall River, like things of that nature.
Okay. So I am the third son and child to my mother, Brenda Saxon. She was born in Providence, Rhode Island. I'm also my dad's first son, Isaac Talavera. They had me very young, or at least for my father. My mother was 22. My father was 15. Yeah, I was just born in Fall River in April 13, 1999. So just made the right before the 2000s. I take pride in that, claiming 90s babies. So anyone born in the early 90s, I still consider myself part of that group. I try to cling to that. But yeah, my parents weren't married. They were they never were, I guess, really together. I have a song called Closed Chapter. In the line I say my parents weren't married, but they were divorced. I like to think that my parents had like a somewhat of a, like in another life they were married, and they maybe at one point were head over heels about each other, but they just, I don't know, this I feel like it was just too clashing, of a relationship, kind of like it just would never work. So they just were never they weren't together long in my life, so uh I don't have my mother actually passed away when I was 16.
Sorry to hear that.
It's all right. Um I would like to think that I was probably the closest with my mother. Um not to put her business out there, but she didn't have custody of her first two kids, her first two sons. And I think I was the kind of like the first kid that she's had custody of the longest. So I felt like we had like a closer bond than my other siblings. I also have a younger sister. Shout out my sister. Uh, but she was younger, so she wasn't with our mother longer. Like I was. So, and my sister is like 5 years younger than me, so I'm 25. Um, and then my father, he ended up exiting out my life around like the age of like two, maybe. So, and I feel like that's kind of like common, I guess, in Fall River. Fall River is not like the greatest place to grow up and uh live. I mean, I guess any place is just kind of like what you make it. It has its nice spots, but like, the majority of Fall River residents, I'm sure, experience some type of, maybe trauma or just like rough living, whatever you want to call it, just struggle. But yeah, I'm just not really close with my biological father. Um, I never say that. I can't say he's dead, but I can say that he's dead to me, and being a father of two daughters, I can never see myself not doing everything I can as a man and as a person who's went through not having a father or parents. Uh, to not do anything in my will to try to be with my kids, see them, check up on them. And during my childhood, my father never really, I just hardly ever see him. You know, when I was a child, I used to hold this man as like I saw him as a hero, a superhero. Like this is who I want to be when I grow up. You know, when I saw my father, I saw a man with a cape. I saw him as Superman, and eventually, as I got older, I realized that Superman is no more than just Clark Kent. You know, um, in the comics, it's the other way around. Clark Kent is Superman. That's who he is. He's from Krypton. But it's like with my father, Superman is just Clark Kent, and it's just I don't know. It was just tough growing up to accept that. And I didn't really even accept that until I was like in my late teens. Because I hardly ever saw my father after he exited my life around the age of 2. I only remembered the good parts. And I'd always wonder why he wasn't there. But to know why he wasn't there wasn't always like that didn't affect how I viewed him. Because I only had what I know, which was my experience with him. And as I got older, talking to other people, um, like people he's known, and uh, it's just growing up was kind of hard because I felt like I had to pay for the sins of my father. Like my father, he ended up like just when I say he left, he more than just left out of my life. He like left the state. He left Massachusetts. He left Rhode Island, New England. Um, Many people didn't even know where he was. And during the time, around the time that he had me, he was kind of known uh, to be kind of like that guy. He was the one that everyone always depended on, that we could go to, just kind of like looked up to. And then he ended up, both my parents ended up like falling to addiction. Uh, I'm not sure exactly when in their life, but I just know that like that was like one of the main things that like they just both my parents couldn't end up being they couldn't just be there for me. You know? Yeah, I like to give a little bit more credit to my mother because even with her battles of addiction, she still kind of like showed up as much as she could. You know, I never been through addiction, so I can never speak on that myself. But it's just kind of tough, uh, knowing that it all just comes down to like the first choice that you make. You know, and a lot of people they can't see the road down, where it leads, and when people try to like warn you and stuff like that, like it's it's just like okay, yeah, he's talking about whatever, but to actually go through it, I can only picture it as like you being held by like restraints, like locked up. Like you're just being carrying around this ball and chain. That's how I kind of picture addiction as, especially when it comes to drugs. Like, you see like the drug addicts on the streets and stuff like that, especially in today with like fentanyl and stuff, like you just see them like they just look trapped. Like that's not that person was once a kid. Like that's not the same person, like and almost like how I picture it is that like this drug kind of just has you like in a jail cell, like I said, in restraints and stuff like that, and you're just like starving. You're starving for like love and sunshine and everything that you just probably just never had that ended up resorting you to the drugs in the first place. So that's kind of like why I picture for my mother, but like my father, I maybe it's just a double standard because he's a man, but like, or maybe it's just because I always, at least I had my mother, so even with her struggles and just seeing her kind of like just show up, maybe it was like it wasn't this like look behind the curtain of like kind of like the Wizard of Oz. Like, oh, they think Oz is such this big and powerful wizard, and then you just look behind the curtain, and it's just some dude like on a microphone, And it's like it wasn't like that with my mother. It was like that with my father, So it's like it was more than just like losing no respect. It was like, it's like you just don't even exist to me anymore, you know. But yeah, yeah, it was. I wouldn't say it was an easy childhood, but it was it was my childhood, and I know that I try to refrain from complaining too much, because even with my own struggles, uh, it could always be a lot worse. So I try to be even grateful for the tough times.
Yeah, and I actually really appreciate that you felt comfortable enough to share that and
No, most
went
definitely.
into that because not everyone's going to feel comfortable sharing their story, especially something as detailed as that and some of the trauma that you've gone through. Because obviously, we're on a podcast, a little more
Mm,
public and stuff, but as an artist, you get to share that in your music, and you might not to get to go into the details
mhm,
like you are on a podcast forum where you get to go into that. So I appreciate your willingness to share that. And based on even just the conversations that we had off podcast, I could tell that you carry yourself in a very positive light and you do a lot of your art and your music to try to help people, to try to relate to people. And I love seeing that you're not allowing, obviously, this is our first time meeting all that stuff, but that being said, like you're at least trying not to allow the stuff that you've gone through to affect who you are and who you want to be.
most
And I
definitely.
think that's a huge part of just when you've gone through trauma and you're going through trauma is to not let that define you as a person,
Hmm.
but it also is a part of your story. So to
Right,
not run away from it completely and on some level embracing, yes, like this happened and I went through this, but I'm still a good person. I'm still grateful for the things that happened, even if they were bad things. I'm still grateful for that because
hmm,
it's getting me to where I ultimately want to go.
right.
And it taught me lessons that I probably wouldn't have learned if I didn't go through these things.
Mhm.
And it's the unfortunate thing about life is when there's good, there's also bad.
Most
And
definitely.
sometimes with the bad is really, really bad. And it's unfortunate that a lot of people, including yourself, have gone through things that like they shouldn't have. Like you didn't deserve that. Like you didn't ask for that when you came to this earth. Like none of that was designed for you. And maybe it was in the cosmos and the universe or God or whatever you believe in. But at the same time, you're still trying to be the best person that you can be. You're still trying to be the best person. You said you had daughters, correct?
Yes, two of them.
Two of them. Congrats
Beautiful.
on that. Children
Thank
are a
you.
blessing.
Most
Um,
definitely.
to try to be the best father for them and be there when you can and be there and be supportive and be what your father couldn't be for you is everything, because there's a lot of people that might have gone through something similar and allowed that to prevent them from being a good parent to their children if they have children, or being a boyfriend or girlfriend to their significant other, or just being a good friend in general. Like, people allow bad things that happen to them affect them as a person and also affect their relationships,
Mhm.
versus what you're doing is not allowing that to affect your relationships, or at least trying not to. And obviously going through something so traumatic can be very difficult to do to, like, prevent that from happening. So, like, kudos to you for being willing to try to keep being a positive person after going through such traumatic things, because especially when it's your family. Like,
Right.
that's such a difficult thing to grasp, and obviously you're still very young, so it's like still trying to grasp it, like, still
No,
trying
most
to work
definitely.
through that, and obviously the trauma of losing a parent too, especially the primary parent that was there for you for
Right.
most of your um childhood into your teenage years, is obviously a difficult thing to kind of still mess with. If you're comfortable, I would like to kind of know, like, maybe kind of like the coping aspect and the mindset of losing your mother at such a young age, and like maybe how that kind of possibly affected you at that point in your life.
Right. So, uh, kind of just to bring it back a little bit, like,
Hmm.
uh, mine and my mother's relationship, I found very special, but she was also like hardly there. Like I said, she made attempts, and I saw the effort, but even still, like it was hard to um it was hard to cope with the loss because, and there's a reason for that, because when I was around like 5 years old, I ended up going to move with my grandmother on my father's side, so his mother. So there was some situation that I even don't even know to this day of what happened. Um, but some people say that she was going to be incarcerated, so someone needed to watch me and my sister. So me and my sister ended up splitting, and I ended up going with my grandmother who lived in South Carolina. So she came and picked me up, and I stayed with her for about like 2 years. And after the 2 years, my mother came and retrieved me. Uh, at the time, I was living in Florida, so we ended up going back on a Greyhound bus, and we're living in a new spot, and it felt great. And we ended up living in New Bedford, and she was my parent, my guardian, everything. So, but that ended up only like lasting like 8 months maybe. I remember I didn't even finish the grade that I was in with her. So those 8 months were a very like they're very vivid because it was only 8 months. You know, it's not like I had like a whole childhood to like be like, oh, I don't know what happened. But after, I remember that was the only time that I could really remember ever living with her. And then not only that, not only would it be the first, it was also like the last. So after that, me and my sister, we ended up going into foster care after those 8 months. Um, I I couldn't tell you why, but uh, just remember just bounced home to home with just random people, and uh, I actually kind of explained it a little bit in my song Foster Child, but we ended up like bouncing home to home with just strangers, and then getting attached to a few families here and there because we stayed with them longer. And then me and my sisters, we didn't have parents, and to see other foster parents have like their own kids and see how they, raise a family and stuff like that, like it seemed special. Like, okay, that's what it seemed like it's supposed to be like. Maybe we can like join in, but with foster care, that's not the reality of it. So it's like they keep having that special feeling given to you, taken away, given to you, taken away. You just get numb to even just being part of anything, you know. And then eventually, me and my sister, we ended up going with my mother's like kind of like family friends. Uh, we went with my mother's godmother's family. Um, and I kind of saw my mother here and there because my mother was more or less related to these people that took us in. Um, But even still, there was a lot of restrictions. There was a lot of things that came with that. We were with this family through the foster care system, so there was a lot of like things that had to be put in check, like regulations and all these other things, social workers, all this other good stuff. Uh, so and when I was with these people, kind of like I was saying before, like I had to pay for the sins of my father. I also had to pay for the sins of my mother. So it's like with outside source, like not outside sources, but like with people that knew my parents growing up when they were growing up, a lot of their decisions got reflected on me because by the odds stacked against me, I'm going to turn out like how they turned out. Like there's just no way. And for me, my parents were always the example of what not to be. You know, uh, but I loved my mother. I really do. I To this day I love her. Uh, and I wish that I could have spent my years, my adult years with her, because when I was living with this family, because of her own actions, even though she made mistakes, you know, they 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 judged my mother as if she was those mistakes. And I know we all have to take accountability in this life, especially as adults, because it's like uh, my mother, she didn't have a good childhood either. It was, I guess, it might have been so bad that she didn't even want to tell me about it, because I remember asking her, and she's like, "Oh, I'll tell you when you're older." And then I remember I asked when I was older, and she was like, "Oh, don't worry about it." But a lot of people that I know, that saw her grow up, they just tell me that she just had a rough life. I think she was on her own when she was 12, which is tough for a kid. It's even worse than me, I feel like. But yeah, they're just the people I lived with. They expected me to like kind of like badmouth my mother in order for me to be in good graces with them. You know, I earned brownie points with the family I was staying with if I like disrespected like a phone call. I disrespected my mother in a phone call, and it's like, how is a kid supposed to feel about that? Like, I have to make the decision that. And by the way, like just to put it out there, like my life wasn't like you know bubble gum, candy, gumdrops and butterflies with this family that I was staying with. It was actually like they had their own kids, and I felt like I was the black sheep of the family. So uh, my life was very different, compared to the rest of the family. Uh, just the best way I could put it, it felt like I was like living a Cinderella story, you know. Um, but in order to, you know, be in good graces with this family, I had to be on the phone with my mother during like our phone calls when she would call, and I'd have to disrespect my mother. Be like giving her attitude, or maybe just like say like, if she said she was gonna come by, I'd have to be like, yeah, okay, sure, or whatever. And then after hanging up, and maybe I could like watch TV for being rewarded. Like that's my reward. And it's just like cool, yeah, I get to watch TV, but it's like overall, like I'm left with this feeling of like regret. Like I didn't want to do that, but I had to at a young age, I had to make the decision like, am I gonna care about the relationship I'm having on my day-to-day life with these people that I'm staying with? Or am I gonna care about the relationship that I have with my mother that I hardly see, that I may never live with again, you know? And there were times that I felt like uh that I had meant, what I said, to my mother, or how I acted towards her on the phone, or maybe even in person, during like visitations and stuff. But eventually, me and my sister, we ended up getting adopted by these people, uh, and our last name had to be changed. And I remember these people, they ended up asking me like which last name I wanted to keep. And when I was born, I ended up being born with both of my parents' last name. My mother's last name was Saxon, my father's name was Talavera. So my name was Iquan Saxon Talavera. And it was weird, but I enjoyed it. You know what I mean? Like I took pride in that. I got to honor uh both of my parents. But then to like be faced with the challenge of picking which last name do I want as my middle name, because one of the my birth's last names had to be my middle name because I was adopting a new last name. So I ended up choosing my mother because it was like I always loved my mother, you know. Um, and at the age of I believe 15, I said all that leading up to this. I ended up running away on multiple occasions. Um, I remember running away after like an aftermath of like a blizzard, and I was gone for like a month. Um, and then I ended up running away again that same year. I think it was 2014, 2015, 2015, I believe. In like July. And then I remember seeing my mother in like months, if not like over a year, you know. And it was just a different type of energy to like feel free after being, running away and like uh and by running away, like cops were looking for me. Uh I remember jumping out of a second floor window in the middle of the night, and it just I don't know, it just felt like a different type of freedom to just be a son to my mother, and just not have to worry about like any of it. And I remember just explaining all that to her, kind of like what I just said about, yeah, they were right there listening on the phone, and they wanted to make sure that I kind of like disrespected you and all this other stuff. And you know, she couldn't believe it. Like she really thought that I was like meaning those things that I was saying. Maybe to some degree I was, because I had a little bit of resentment, of like, why can't you just like get yourself fixed, so you can watch me and my sister, your kids, But I didn't fully understand that. But I felt it. It's like I couldn't put it to words, but that's what I felt. And but seeing my mother like just and explaining that, it's just like I don't know, it just felt like a whole movie plot. Like something
Yeah,
I couldn't escape.
like, dude, that's powerful. Like,
Yeah.
it's sad that the people who ended up taking you and put you in a position to have to do something like that when you're you're not your parents.
Right.
Like, yeah, they're your parents and part of them is you, but like you aren't them though.
Right.
And it's sad that adults couldn't see that and they held the sins of them against you and made you do things that you had to pick, like you said, between like disrespecting your mother and being able to be in good standing with them. Like
Mhm.
that's not fair to do for especially in your teenage years where things are already confusing. Like things are difficult to already grasp, whether you're talking about school, relationships, puberty, all these other
Mm.
stuffs going into things. And then the dynamic of you wanting a relationship with your mother, obviously it's kind of common sense that you'd want that.
Mhm.
And them putting you in a position to have to disrespect her just so you could be part of the family, quote unquote, in their eyes.
Right.
Like it's sad that people in that position who can foster and are fostering could do that. And based on all the statistics and things that we do know, that happens way more than people realize.
Most definitely.
And not to go into the topic, like the hot topics that people talk about, like abortion, all that stuff, but like this is the side that people don't want to talk about with like the foster care and adoption and all these other things is like there are a lot of positives, but there
Right.
are also some very dark negatives that come as a consequence to the fostering system and
Most
people out
definitely.
there. And it's not talked about enough. So I really appreciate that you're kind of bringing up your story and bringing it to light because we don't hear these stories all the time.
Right.
And a lot of these people never get the chance to share their story either because sometimes they end up in a position just like their their parents or their situation, they could end up in the same type of repeated cycle almost. And like
Right.
based on kind of like the energy that you bring in the conversations that we've had off air, like I could tell you're very big on it's almost like breaking the cycle. You don't want to be like them. You
Yeah,
want to
most
be
definitely.
different. Obviously, you're carrying their energy and you want to like honor them as
Mhm.
people, like they're your parents. Like obviously in some level, like do want to like respect them as like people because like before all the stuff happens, like
Mhm.
the things that happen to them aren't all necessarily always their fault either. Like you're talking
Mhm.
about, like your mother possibly having like a very difficult childhood.
Mhm.
Like some of the stuff that happened to her might not have been her fault either.
No, most
And like,
definitely.
so it's like obviously taking accountability is a huge thing, but you breaking that cycle is everything. and
Oh,
that goes with
that's the
everyone.
whole plot. I remember during those times that I was staying with that adopted family. Which, by the way, after I got adopted, things became a lot harder because there weren't really like social workers from the Department of Children and Families, aka DCF, to kind of like maintain that, you know, like doing the check-ins and stuff like that that allowed uh, me to not feel so pressured. But after being adopted, all that stuff ended up going away, and I was just living the way that they wanted me to live. And I just remember, like I said, like these people, they know of my parents. They know my mother more than they knew my father, but they just know the sins that my parents had done. So they end up, that casts a big shadow on me. It's like no matter what, he's going to turn out the way how his parents turned out. So we have to already discipline him and punish him for not only his parents' actions, but actions that he may never even do. You know, uh, and I remember they would put me in a kind of like a corner, or they'd put me against the wall. By put me, I mean like they'd sit me against the wall, watching them live such a happy, like typical American dream type of life. And I just had to sit there day in and day out, 24/7, 365 days watching. And it kind of just, it felt very difficult to watch, but it also became like something that just like, it became something that I wanted to strive for myself, but I wanted to do it my way, the right way. Like I have kids. So like everything that I went through, I know I will never put that on to my kids. Like a lot of people, they don't know how to deal with their trauma. Some of the things that they had to experience as a child. They don't know how to direct that. They don't know, so maybe they might think of it like subconsciously, like, okay, I don't want to do this. But then they're put to almost like to the test, and then just kind of like repeating the cycle. During like times that I was going to bed, I would stay up like really late at night, just thinking, and praying. I was like, what I want to do when I grow up is that I want to break the cycle, break the chain. I felt like that. I always put this on myself, but I always felt like I was like a prophet for my own bloodline. You know, uh, my parents went through like crazy stuff through their own childhood. They didn't even graduate high school, neither of them. So I was like, okay, graduating high school is like step number one. Which I did, and and obviously by default, by not going to high school, they didn't go to college. They didn't have a stable job. They didn't have a stable living situation. They didn't have a lot of things. They didn't even have a car. So it's like which may seem like normal to a lot of people and easy to come by, but when you're coming from an environment that's very common, so it's like it's very important to me to make sure, because not only does my parents not have it, I'm getting told that I will never have it. So it's like I have like just multiple things just fueling me all at once. It's more than just like breaking a chain. It's proving a point. You know, it's like it's like everything is like just connected, like with just like a different like font. It's like, okay, people are telling me I can't do this because I'm gonna end up like my parents. Like I used to get told I was nothing. Like you're going to be nothing. You are nothing. All you'll ever be is nothing. Like I got told that, like yelled at in my face. And like I'm thinking that I'm going to be that. I'm thinking that I'm no more than just a specimen just floating amongst everybody else, and it's just like I could die and no one would even bat an eye. I used to think that at like 13, 14, 15 years old. Like what kid should be thinking that at that age at all? Period. Nobody should be thinking that. So it's like when you're getting told that by people who are supposed to be basically your parents and your role models and your guardians and the people that are supposed to be teaching you, like they're put in a position to teach you the way of life, and then you see the people who were supposed to be that not do that. Just like, okay, not only do I have to break the chain and prove a point, like I have to be greater than, it's kind of like I just have to reverse what they said to me, that energy and the words that they said. I have to reverse that back. I have to fight twice as hard with light against the dark, because I remember there was so many nights it was just like the dark was consuming me, you know. So many times it was just like, what am I even here for? So many times that I was sitting there laying in bed, uh, after standing in the corner or in the kitchen watching everybody else live a great life and me not being able to do any of that for years and years and years, days and days and days, hours and hours and hours. Like it was like I was plotting world domination. It was like a lot of people that's their villain origin story. And for me, the way that like darkness like feeds into me, you know, it creates a lot of energy for me to like fight back with light. But like it's like I really do walk down the middle between light and dark. It's like, do I become what everybody says that I'm going to be? Or do I become what that I've set myself destined to be? Like, do I become everything that I want to be 10 times over just to kind of like almost rub it in their face? But like also to like fulfill myself and my inner child and all that other good stuff. It just becomes hard because it's like I could use that same energy and become so great, but like be so like kind of like the person that you just hate. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a
Like,
very fine line of what you're
yeah,
kind of working with and trying to prove everyone wrong, but also the fear of becoming the thing that you were told that you are. So I could see that internal dialogue being difficult to kind of handle and wrap your arms around. I'm definitely curious to know like where the music starts to come into this. Like I could imagine obviously your life and some of the trauma that you've gone through influencing a lot of the music, and I
most
listened to some of
definitely.
like your clips and some of your music before
Yeah.
the interview. And I typically don't do that, but I was like very interested, and I could definitely see a lot of the passion and stuff that where it's coming from. Obviously, I didn't know all of this that you're
No, for
telling me
sure.
now, but like hearing some of your clips and hearing this now makes a lot of sense. So I'm curious
Mhm.
to know where the music starts to come into this.
So, a lot of like musicians and artists, they always have like the story of like, oh, I was surrounded by it and like, uh, so it kind of like it was like the start of like whatever. You know how like that whole like backstory goes for most musicians. For me, it was like I never really had like music in my life. Um, when I was younger, I really enjoyed they called it like chorus class. Like all the like I went to Watson Elementary. They had like all the fifth graders like learn like rocking around the Christmas tree for Christmas time and then sing it. And I really enjoyed that. And then I remember going to Talbot Middle School in Fall River, and they were going to have kind of like a similar class. And I remember I really wanted to do it because I remember how much I enjoyed it in fifth grade in elementary school. But then I remembered my adopted family ended up telling me no, for whatever reason. Um, and the my adopted family's interests influenced me a lot because they were really into like WWE, baseball. So I actually wanted to be I really found that I was really fast, like just running wise. Um so I'd do whatever to try to get on base and I was always stealing. Um so I actually wanted to be a baseball player. But I don't know. I think just because of how like the whole running away situation and then, finding out that you have to be like in school and because when you're a runaway, you're not doing school. I actually missed out on the whole year. But um actually after I got adopted at age 12, they ended up pulling us from the public schools and we were homeschooled, which was like the worst thing ever. Um you know, Shout out to the people that do the homeschool, but just my experience it was the worst thing ever. It created social anxiety. Um, it created just a lot of insecurities within myself, especially already. getting told I'm not this, I'm not that, I don't do this, I don't do that. Basically, getting treated like as if I had some like type of like mental disability or whatever. It created a lot of like internal issues, but also like external too, like of how I just performed and talked to people. Um, but yeah, I always wanted to. I don't know. I just always like proving myself. I think that was always in me because I remember the family they would always call me like a show off or whatever. Um, but I would get like really like hype like if I did something like let's say in baseball, got a double. I'm getting really hype. Um, there was a lot of things that I wanted to be when I wanted to grow up. Um, that I feel like that led to being a musician. Like there was at one point I wanted to be a detective. I felt like I was really good at finding clues, finding things that weren't there that should be there, finding things that are just missing. Um, finding that story, which also I wanted to be an author too, like kind of like a just a fictional author. I remember a lot of the times that uh I would be in bed. Even still, it was like kind of like a thing that I created when I was like really little. Like when you have like such an inconsistent home and stuff like that. For me, I had to like create my own family and like friends, because nothing was ever consistent in my life. But my my hands when I was like 5 or 6 years old were my best friends. I literally gave them names. Um, I was named after one of my favorite cousins, and then Chucky after Chuck E. Cheese. But I would talk to them, and then I'd talk out loud as if they were talking to me back, kind of like a conscience. You know what I mean? Um, which yeah, but um, so there was. I just love to create stories. I used to tell myself stories of like kind of like just giving myself like a better life. I used to live my life through people. I'd be watching like Disney Channel, which was like the only thing I could create. I mean, that I could watch, and I'd create stories of like me being on Disney Channel one day, or whatever. You know what I mean? Just like somehow, some way, just always creating stories of me just living a better life. So I feel like a lot of the things just kind of like came into place. Like being a detective allowed me to come up with ways of like figuring out like different rhyme schemes and stuff like that. Wanting to be a baseball player allowed me to like try to have like kind of like have that like performance skill, kind of like showing out, doing what it takes, putting in the hard work, training. Uh, wanting to be an author, allowed me to just gain the skill of like storytelling, you know. Especially like after I became a runaway, a lot of people would wonder about my life. So I would always end up gaining that skill of like storytelling because I always had to tell it from the beginning. I can't just pick a random spot and just be like, "Oh yeah, it kind of like started around here." Like, no, it started the very day the very day that I was birthed. Um, like after being a runaway, I kind of like explored music. I mean, I always heard the radio. I would hear like the radio hits like from Flow Rider, Pitbull, and even other songs like from Jay Z or Eminem that landed on the radio. Drake was starting to kind of like hit the scene, J. Cole too. Um, but then when I ran away, I had like, because we weren't allowed to listen to like hip hop music where I was living at. It was more just like the radio hit, so most of it was pop. And I actually wanted to be a singer, but uh, they kind of like beat that out of me, figuratively speaking, by saying that I couldn't sing anytime I was trying to sing along to the songs that were on the radio. I was really into like Bruno Mars. At the time he just dropped like Grenade and like Just the Way You Are, all his hits. Um, and I really wanted to be a singer. I was hoping to be like on The Voice or American Idol one day. But when I ran away at age 15 and 16, I started to listen to like a lot of hip hop because I ended up running away to my brother's house, which is uh, my mother's second son. And my brother, uh, he he lived freely in Fall River, so he kind of like became a product of his environment a little bit, just listening to like a lot of hip hop, kind of just falling into the wrong crowd, that type of lifestyle. Um, but he also like influenced me not purposefully, but like just listening to the stuff that he was listening to as I was just like, you know, already around him. It was just like, okay, this is kind of cool. I never heard this, never heard anything like this be put in this way or said this way. And then I started to kind of like find I started to kind of like find my people within hip hop. Like started to realize that like I'm not alone. A lot of the messages in hip hop was a lot of people doubted you, so you had to become greater than that. You know, um, you feel like you don't have a voice. Well, hip hop is the place to speak up for yourself. So I kind of like started to indulge in that, and I just started to listen. And I remember when I was younger, like real young, my mother was watching this movie, and it had some like dude in it with that was wearing a beanie, and he was just like rapping on stage, and he's just yelling at this other person. And then it's like, as I get older, I come to find out that movie was 8 Mile, and I remember like time to time again, like every once in a while to hear a song, and I'm just like, yo, this instrumental like is crazy. The beat is crazy. And then I remember just like being in sixth grade, I asked somebody because I heard them playing it out loud. It's like, yo, what's the song? They're like, oh, it's Lose Yourself by Eminem. And I remember after being a runaway, my brother ended up getting me like a some prepaid phone, and I just go and listen to YouTube, and I just keep listening to that song. So uh, Eminem was like my first introduction to hip hop, and it's like his life, is crazy. Not to get to that whole thing, but his life was very parallel to mine. So I was like, oh, and as I used to do before, uh, when creating stories, I'd try to live my life through people, but it wasn't like I had to live my life through them. It was like someone like literally lived almost copy and paste of what I went through, almost. And then this dude became like one of the best selling hip hop artists of all time. So it's like, just the lyrics and his stories started to speak to me, and then I started to like find other people like Jay-Z or Meek Mill, and I was just like, yo, these stories are just like crazy. It's like people are like, I felt like they just lived worse lives than me. And then they came back even harder and just like showed that everything they went through was like not who they were, you know? Um, Kind of like they got rewarded for the pain that they went through. And then making making a song wasn't even really like being a hip hop artist was never like, oh, I'm gonna be that. I'm destined to be that. I just stumbled upon it like uh kind of like just chilling with a bunch of homies. Like, remember they were playing Call of Duty and it wasn't my turn yet. You know how that goes. Like, okay, whoever like is like the least in the scoreboard, they have to give up the controller. So I'm like, okay, I'm waiting. And I just literally put on like beats one time after being so inspired by music, um, that I just started to just write. I just wanted to write, and it was like the wackest shit ever. And then, but like when I did that, I don't know, it was just I couldn't it wasn't maybe as dramatic as I'm going to say, but it just felt like the most me thing that I could have ever done was just like I get to talk about myself and tell a story of everything that I went through because helping people was always like a mission of mine. Like I wanted to be a therapist. That was another thing I wanted to be when I wanted to grow up when I was a kid. Was I wanted to be a therapist so I could use the things that I went through and relate with the kids that maybe like went through something similar. Whether if it was foster kids, maybe just someone going through a hard time, being bullied, whatever. Because I was picked on a lot as a kid too. But I just wanted to help people. So it's like I realized that like if hip hop is helping me, then I can help somebody through hip hop. Like maybe I'm not their first introduction to hip hop, but maybe I'm the first person that they heard go through something crazy. And while typical hip hop may be about like, flaunting and flexing and, having this, that, and a third, it's like, no, this person's talking about going through something that's like never been talked about or doesn't get talked about enough, you know? So it was like, then I actually just started to just like really just dig into like hip hop. Like I'd watch documentaries, I'd watch I'd watch almost every mainstream rapper's like come up story, and it was like they were like, nah, I need to be this. So it's like I knew that I had to kind of have that way of thinking to know that if I wanted to be like them, I have to think the way that they did. Kind of like what we was talking about, like off screen. Like there's no like definition of success. It's just like, but there is kind of like a template. Like you need certain things. Like not everyone could be that. And I was like, nah, I need to have everything that they had, and not like material things, like the mindset of like forget everything that I just went through. I need to everything that I went through, energy wise. I need to like convert that and then put that out into the things that I'm passionate about. And then I just like, and I just realized that like everything that I was going through or everything that I wanted to be from everything that I went through, it just kind of just fell into place. It just felt right, you know? Like, okay, yeah, I want to break my chain. I want to break the generational curse of like my family. I want to be everything that everyone said I wasn't going to be. This is all kind of aligning of what I could do with hip hop. It's just literally the definition of it. Freedom of speech. It's like, no, you can't tell me what to do. Like, you may say that I'm going to be something, but guess what? I'm still gonna speak up and I'm gonna talk back and I'm gonna stick up for myself and I'm not going to be anything that you just said I'm going to be. I'm gonna be me. I'm gonna be what I want to be. So fuck you. I'm me. There's not. I'm like your words. Like they don't affect me. I'm impenetrable from it. It's like I'm bigger than your words. Then it's like then it kind of like feels better to like show that like people who are just all talk like damn my words ain't even affecting him. And it's like, nah, not like that's my way of fighting back.
It's beautiful when you're able to find your voice essentially too,
Right.
and be able to use music as a way to share your story, to try to help people, but also build yourself up essentially, where
Mhm.
you're really defining who you are and sharing your message at the same time.
Mhm.
And I think it was really cool that you hit on the fact of just like when you talked about role models
Mhm.
and talking about like Eminem being the introduction for your music.
Right.
I think, and I was first thing I thought of was for podcasting. Joe
Mhm.
Rogan was my introduction to podcasting. Was like listening to his conversations of just going off about aliens and talking to a scientist and then talking to like an athlete or a comedian and just having different conversations with different people and being open to whatever they're saying, being willing to ask questions when you don't know the answer to things, being willing to listen to their story and add 2 cents to it from your own life perspective of like what you've gone through to maybe to relate to their story. And I was like, that's really cool. And when I was thinking about my own passions and what I could do, and I started getting into podcasting, I was like, I want to do something just like that, where we're talking about taking that template, making it my own,
Mhm.
but following that model. And
Right.
it seems like when you were talking about your music, and even like when I was listening to some of your stuff, like I could definitely see the influence of Eminem and
Yeah.
see that passion and that fiery attitude, the spirit, the
Yeah.
fight. And that's really cool to actually see that in your music.
Mhm.
And I hope people can see that when I'm doing a podcast and the style that I do it is
Right.
like it's not a copy of Joe Rogan, but it's that style, that template
Right.
that we're talking about is like being able to follow something, a model, and having someone to look up to emulate and
Mhm.
pursue whatever endeavor that you're doing is important when like you have a role model you could like copy and like kind of go after. And
Right.
that's kind of something that you were talking about that actually really resonated with me as you were kind of going into a lot of
That's
that.
cool.
So it made a lot of sense to me at
Yeah.
least. I'm actually really curious, we're getting towards the end, so I want to like
Yeah.
get some important questions in there. The name. How
Yeah.
does the name come into play?
So as a lot of people would think, the rabbit comes from the rabbit from 8 Mile. Um, Now there might be some truths to that, but
I was thinking baseball because you're fast.
yeah. So that was a lot of that was actually what I was going to say was a lot of the kids would call me either Road Runner or Rabbit whenever I would be stealing bases and stuff like that. And rabbits are known to be fast. And it actually started as an Instagram name. My introduction to Instagram, like I've never changed my name. It's always been Kwon Rabbit. Like never like some people will like go through the phase of like, having like some, funny name or uh, just their name, but as they mature, they'll change it. Uh like literally like I think maybe it might have started as like one of those just like cool names that I put together. But then like when I was a runaway, I actually ran away to Louisiana at age of 16, and none of the people in Louisiana knew me. They only knew of my Instagram. And like I'd meet a couple people and they'd be like, they would know them, the people that I knew. But then as I'm getting like introduced to other people, they'd be like, you know, oh, I've seen you in the picture or something like that. And they're like, who are you? I'm like, oh, I'm, such and such friend. And then I'll say my name, like Kwon, because my name is I Kwon. And then someone literally was just like, yo, what was it like? What about a nickname for Kwon? Like like what if your nickname was just Kwon? But like I was like, okay. And I remember my brother would always spell my name wrong because my name is spelled Ikwan, but then my brother would always spell it Ikwon. Because it's just like, when you see an A in there, you're just like, maybe is it Quan, I Quan. But like, the way it's pronounced, you think, okay, I know he has a K in there and a W, so I think it's I Quan with an O. But when someone said Quan, I didn't want to put KWAN. I was like, people are just gonna butcher that. I was like, KWON just looks fire. Uh, and then also like my Chinese zodiac is actually a rabbit for 1999. So it's like everything is just meant to be. So I take pride in the rabbit. A lot of people don't. Uh, Rabbits are small, and I'm short. So it's like, but like rabbits are just so cool. They're fast. They stay out of the way most of the time, and it's just they're really nice animals once you actually like get to know it.
Yeah,
You
you know
know.
what's crazy? It's like how it's like as you're kind of like talking about that, like how the name was just always kind of there.
Yeah.
Like I didn't tell you the story about the Carroll connection and like how
Hmm.
that came up, but like I literally was thinking about the same thing. Was like I've always played football my whole life. I play
Hmm.
flag football to this day.
That's
Um,
awesome.
and I play with like my brothers, and I started playing quarterback, and we
Hmm.
play in indoors sometimes a few years ago. And I would throw it to my older brother, and then he'd catch it. He'd be like, "That's that CC. That's that Carroll connection." And it wasn't
Yeah.
until years later when I was thinking about podcast names,
Hmm.
that's what came. I was thinking
Popped up.
Joe Rogan Experience. I was like the Carroll Connection, and like
Hmm.
that kind of came up, and it's weird as you're talking about just
Right.
like Kwon Rabbit and like how like it ties back to stuff further,
Right.
and like you weren't thinking about like it being like your stage name,
Right.
but like it was always kind of there.
It's just what people always called me when they said like, "Oh, it's Kwon Rabbit," and then there was actually a friend that I knew, um, in Louisiana. He used to go by the name. I don't know if he still does, but he went by the name Turtle. So it was just like when I was always hanging with Turtle, and then my name was already Corn Rabbit. It was just like one of those things that literally just people picked on. You know what I mean? Picked up on. It was like okay, the whole like, tortoise and the hare, or whatever it's called, the story. They were like, oh, turtle and rabbit. You guys gonna race or whatever, and it just became like this like kind of like wave or ripple effect of just people knowing me as that, and then that was it. It was either Quan or Quan Rabbit, and then eventually going to high school like that still being my Instagram name and everyone's like following you. And then uh, walking down the halls of Seekonk, like people get like pretty hyped when, they see someone like this just like they've never seen before. Like I'm just a kid that wants to be a rapper, you know, and I have this like kind of like this crazy energy as I carry with me of like trying to always prove myself, and it's just like that's cool to see, like, um, and not everyone has that, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just like when you see someone that's like I don't know why, but he just looks determined. He has this like youthful, um, outgoing spirit, and it's like super infectious. It's like that's Quan Rabbit. So it's just like one of those things where people see me walking down the hall. It's like Quan Rabbit, and then because during like the transitional uh times between classes as we're walking down the halls, like other people are listening to that. They're like, "Oh, that's who that is. That's Quan Rabbit." Like to this day, I get people like saying like, "Yo, Quan Rabbit," and I've never met this person in my life. I really like, and I wanted to say like I truly do apologize to everybody that if I ever come off like just like not caring or any type of like not exciting way when you call me, when you call my name, it's just like I just don't know who you are, because it's like it was like that in high school. It was like that even post high school to this day. Like it just be like, because we're in the Seekonk area, so it's just like I'll see it like at least for people they'll see like a lot of they'll see me out and about. They'd be like, oh, he looks familiar. Oh, that's Kwon Rabbit. So uh it's just sometimes it's just like I don't know who you are. I'm sorry. Maybe you were friends with someone I knew, but it's just it's just a name that just stuck that just became powerful to me.
Yeah, and that's honestly really cool. It's like a cool
Thank you.
story too behind it.
Yeah.
Um, as we're wrapping up, I
Mhm.
do have that one more question for you,
For sure.
but I do also want to ask if you can kind of like make this maybe a little bit shorter
Yeah.
and quick, but like future plans for music
Uh my future plan is to be the biggest independent artist of all time, hip hop artist of all time.
and working on anything currently. Any things that we could expect in the like coming future at all? Like any singles, albums, EPs, stuff like that.
I'm currently working on my third album called The Forsaken Prophet. It's just like this alter ego that I created within music. It's like a superhero themed album. I'm very big into superheroes, especially Batman. So I created my own superhero within rap and just joined my interests together. Um, so that should be coming out in the very near future. So
Okay, cool.
yeah,
And that'll be really exciting. I'm
can't wait to
excited.
show it.
Yeah. So, Kwam, last
Yes,
question I have for you will
yes.
be what would your advice be for someone who wants to pursue their passion?
I would say find what fuels you the most. Find what you can't stop thinking about. Find something that keeps you up at night, and absolutely just like truly, truly, truly go after it until you are like really fulfilled. Because nothing in this life is going to fulfill you other than your passion, and that passion can come in many different ways. Like your passion could just be like feeding your family. It doesn't have to be being a musician or starting a podcast. It could just be as, something as simple as like, I want to draw, you know, 100 pictures this year. Do that, like, and don't let anybody tell you that you can't do it, you know, because those type of people are not happy with themselves, you know, and j- try to achieve things like whatever your passion is, no matter how high that passion is, do it no matter what. Because it's like the people that are going to tell you don't do it, they're choosing a regular life. They're choosing to live in fear because someone told them not to do it. So and they had to think realistic, and real thinking realistically is like the closest thing to mediocrity. So it's like, why would you think realistic? If you believe that you could be the president of the United States, like work towards it, you know, believe in it because it's like faith without works is dead, you know? So it's like you have to believe that in yourself. So it's just like whatever you're gonna do, like do what truly like just fuels you and keeps you up at night, you know? I think that's really all
Yeah,
I can say.
you said
Works is dead.
faith without works is dead.
Yeah. It's in the Bible.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that actually really resonates, and I think it's just true. Like you gotta like really commit to it. Like you actually have to like go after it, and you can't allow other people's opinions sway you because, like you said, someone in their life might have told them not to do something out of fear, and
Right.
like I don't write this book if I just believe that like I can't write books. Like I'm
Right.
just a normal person. I can't write a book. Like no, just research. Anyone can write a book. This is self-published. Anyone can
Right.
self-publish. Like, if you want to go through a publisher, it's a whole different, whole different hoops you're gonna have to jump
But
through.
in
But
today's
like,
society, the information's there. You just
you
gotta
can,
go
yeah,
find it.
anything's possible. Like,
Right.
if you really want to do something, you might not be like I might not be the number one podcast in the world. I'm fine with that, but I started the podcast.
Right.
I wrote a book. You started doing music. You're a musician. Like, you decided to do that. I decided to do these things. Like, without that like desire and that push and that motivation to like actually achieve something bigger than ourselves, we'd be just doing what?
Exactly.
Probably a bunch of nothing. Like,
I'd be miserable.
and it's all towards passion, all towards helping. And when you can align, and typically a lot of the times your passion will be aligned in some form of fashion. And I've noticed this throughout the podcast, a lot of my guests with helping people.
Mm,
So the more that we can help people and try to motivate people and inspire people to do things they enjoy, it's going to push more of a positive energy out into this world. And I think we need more of that. But
most definitely.
Quan, I really appreciate you for coming on this podcast. And I
Thank
thought
you
this
for
was a
having me.
really powerful conversation. And I just appreciate your willingness to share your story and to go into some of the details that you have, because not everyone is comfortable to do that. So I
Mhm.
appreciate you for that.
Oh, thank you for having me, for real. Thank you for giving me the space to talk about it.
Absolutely. And if you want, look into this camera and just plug all your like your music and all that stuff.
My name is Kwon Rabbit, the Forsaken Prophet. You can find me on Instagram, KWON Rabbit, RABBIT, TikTok, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, you name it, I'm there.
Perfect. And for you guys, if you guys like the podcast, please rate, review, subscribe, share with your friends, share with your family, share with your grandma. Check it out, thecarolconnection.simplecast.com. Also, Apple Podcast, Spotify, and all the major listening platforms. If you like to watch your podcast, go on YouTube, search The Carroll Connection, or at Jared M. Carroll, and it should pop up for you. And if you want to be a guest or return as a guest, hit me up on Instagram at Jared M. Carroll, at The Carroll Connection. We'll set that up, as well as check on Amazon for the 5 Pillars to Create a Meaningful Life. Buy it, support me, and once you read it, review it, goes a long way.
Hit them up.
Please do. Till next time, guys. Peace.
Deuces.